All right, so get this. We're about to dive into some sources, and, they might make you think twice about the idea of coincidence. And we're talking about former President Donald Trump.
Okay.
And some really strange connections they kind of pop up all around him.
Interesting.
You ready for this?
I'm ready. Let's hear it.
Okay, perfect.
Yeah.
So we've got this book series.
That's okay.
From the late 1800s.
All right.
A solar eclipse passing over towns with a very specific name, a controversial decision about Jerusalem, and even a connection to Nikola Tesla.
Wow.
The genius inventor.
It was quite a mix.
I know, right? It's a lot. Where do we even begin?
Well, let's start with the book series The Baron Trump by Ingersoll Lockwood.
Okay.
This series, and especially the book The Last President, has really caught the attention of people who believe in the idea of prophetic fiction. This idea that some works of fiction actually predict real-world events.
And I could see why the main character is named Baron Trump. He lives in a place called Castle Trump. And one of the books even describes a populist president who gets elected during a time of unrest.
Yeah.
It's like looking into a mirror reflecting our own times.
The parallels are definitely striking. But what's important here isn't just the surface similarities.
Okay.
Those who see this as prophetic, they point to specific details in the book.
Give me an example.
For example, in The Last President, the fictional president takes office in a really chaotic and divided nation, very much like the atmosphere surrounding Trump's 2016 victory.
So it's not just about the names.
Yeah.
It's about the context, too.
Exactly. And they argue that these details go beyond mere coincidence.
Okay.
They see them as clues, deliberate clues that were left by the author,
Okay.
hinting at a future that includes Donald Trump.
Hold on. I get that some people find these parallels intriguing. But how can a children's book from the 1800s
Right.
actually predict a presidency over a century later?
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it? And it really comes down to how you interpret the idea of prophecy. For some, prophecy is a literal step-by-step prediction of the future. For others, it's more about themes and patterns that repeat throughout history.
So depending on your perspective, these books could be seen as either directly predicting Trump's presidency or perhaps reflecting broader historical cycles that happen to align with his time in office.
Precisely. And that's what makes this so fascinating. It challenges us to think about how we interpret history and how we make sense of events that seem to defy explanation.
Okay, so we've got these books that, depending on your interpretation, might hint at a Trump presidency, but where does the solar eclipse fit into all of this?
Right. So remember the Great American Eclipse of April 8th, 2017?
I do.
The path of that eclipse passed over several towns named Nineveh.
Nineveh, as in the ancient city from the Bible.
That's the one.
Yeah.
In the book of Jonah, Nineveh was a city facing divine judgment.
Okay.
But the people repented and the city was spared.
And some people see this eclipse as a similar sign for America.
Yes.
Yeah.
Especially those who believe in end times prophecy. This is the idea based on interpretations of biblical texts that we're living in a period leading up to a major transformation of the world, often associated with judgment and redemption.
So for people who subscribe to that belief system, an eclipse over towns named Nineveh might seem like a pretty significant event.
Yeah.
Like a cosmic warning, maybe.
Exactly. And it's important to remember that this was happening around the time of Trump's election.
Right.
A time when there were already many conversations about the state of American society and its moral direction.
So you've got these calls for national repentance and spiritual renewal happening alongside a solar eclipse with a pretty loaded name. It's easy to see how people could connect those dots.
And it's not just about the eclipse itself.
Okay.
Proponents of this idea also point to other events happening around the same time.
Like what? Give me an example.
Well, consider Trump's decision to move the U.S. Embassy to Jerusalem.
That was a huge deal. It caused a lot of controversy internationally,
Yeah.
but it was really popular with some groups in the U.S.
Especially evangelical Christians. For them, Jerusalem has a very specific significance.
Okay.
It's the city where, according to biblical prophecy, many end times events are supposed to unfold.
So moving the embassy was more than just a political decision.
Right.
It was almost like a symbolic gesture,
Yeah.
aligning America with a particular interpretation of biblical prophecy.
Precisely.
Yeah.
And for those who see Trump as a figure playing a role in these end times prophecies, this move seemed to fit right into that narrative.
Okay, so we've got these connections to prophetic fiction, a symbolically charged eclipse, and a controversial decision about Jerusalem. And somewhere in all of this is Nikola Tesla.
Yes!
I'm dying to know how he fits into this puzzle.
This is where things get really interesting. Remember, Tesla was a brilliant inventor.
Oh, yeah.
But some of his ideas were way ahead of his time.
Right.
He talked about things like wireless power and even weapons like a death ray.
Wow.
Now, after Tesla died in 1943, his research was examined by John Trump,
Okay.
who happened to be Donald Trump's uncle.
Wait, John Trump? As in the Donald Trump's uncle?
The one and only. Wow.
He was an MIT professor and a respected expert in his field.
So what did John Trump find when he looked at Tesla's research?
He concluded that there wasn't any immediate threat to national security in those papers.
Okay.
But what's interesting is that after John Trump examined them, many of Tesla's files disappeared.
Really?
No one knows for sure what happened to them.
Missing files conspiracy theories. This is getting good.
It definitely adds to the mystery. And some people speculate that these missing files might contain information about technologies that could be relevant to today's world.
So they're saying that Donald Trump, through his uncle, might have access to secret Tesla tech.
It's more of a question than a statement. No one knows for sure what was in those files or where they ended up.
Right.
But the possibility is certainly intriguing, especially given the other connections we've already discussed.
All right, this is a lot to process. We've got children's books, a solar eclipse, Jerusalem, and now Tesla's missing files all swirling around Donald Trump. Where do we go from here? Well, let's dig a little deeper into some of these connections. One of our sources, a YouTube video called "Is Trump the Last President?" lays out some pretty specific arguments about Trump's potential role in these so-called end times. Are you ready to unpack that?
Absolutely.
Let's dive in.
So this video you shared, "Is Trump the Last President?" It features a pretty compelling conversation between a rabbi and Troy Anderson.
Okay.
And Anderson's an author who's really dug deep into all these Trump connections.
What makes their conversation stand out? What are they saying that's different from what we've already talked about?
Well, they go beyond just pointing out the parallels between the fictional Barron Trump and the real Donald Trump.
Okay.
They actually analyze the arguments made by people who believe that Lockwood's books are prophetic.
So instead of just saying, hey, look, they both have a connection to Fifth Avenue, they're actually looking at the logic behind the prophetic interpretation. What kind of arguments are they making?
One of the key arguments is this idea of hidden messages encoded within the books.
For example, they point to specific phrases and symbols that they believe allude to events in Trump's life or his presidency.
So it's like a coded language that only those in the know can understand.
That's the idea. They claim that Lockwood was embedding clues about a future he foresaw, using a language that wouldn't be fully understood until much later.
That's a pretty big claim. Do they provide any specific examples of these hidden messages?
They do. For instance, they point to a passage in one of the books where Barron Trump travels to Russia.
Okay.
And they connect this to Trump's alleged ties to Russia and the controversy surrounding his 2016 election.
So they're taking real-world events and trying to match them up with passages in these 19th century books.
Exactly. And they argue that the sheer number of these connections is too significant to be mere coincidence. They believe it points to a deliberate pattern, a prophetic plan that's been unfolding for decades.
But couldn't you say that they're just cherry-picking examples that fit their narrative? I mean, there are probably a lot of things in those books that don't match up with Trung life.
That's a valid point. And that's one of the criticisms leveled against those who interpret these books as prophecy. Critics argue that it's too easy to find connections after the fact, especially when you're dealing with a long and complex series of books.
It's like if you look hard enough for patterns,
right,
you're bound to find them whether they're really there or not.
Right. But the people making this argument would say that these aren't just random or superficial connections.
Okay.
They believe there's a deeper meaning, a hidden layer of symbolism that reveals a prophetic truth.
Okay, so we've got these claims about hidden messages in the books. What else are the rabbi and Troy Anderson talking about in this video?
Well, they also spent a lot of time discussing Trump's actions and policies, particularly those related to Israel.
All right.
Remember, we talked about the significance of Jerusalem for those who believe in end times prophecy.
Yeah, it's like the epicenter of biblical prophecy, right?
Exactly. And the rabbi and Anderson see Trump's decision to move the U.S. Embassy to Jerusalem as a major step in the fulfillment of those prophecies.
So to be clear, end times prophecy, for those who might not be familiar, basically refers to a set of beliefs based on interpretations of the Bible about how the world will end.
Right. And within those beliefs, there are different interpretations of what will happen when it will happen and who the key players will be.
And some people see Donald Trump as one of those key players.
That's the argument being made here. They point to his unwavering support for Israel, his recognition of Jerusalem as the capital, and his close alignment with evangelical Christian leaders, many of whom hold these end times beliefs.
So for those who believe in these prophecies, Trump's actions seem to be confirming their worldview. It's like watching a prediction unfold before their very eyes.
Exactly. And it's not just about specific actions, it's about a broader sense that Trump is somehow fulfilling a divinely ordained role in these end times.
It's a pretty heady concept, isn't it? I mean, the idea that a political leader is acting out a script written centuries ago.
It is. And it's important to remember that not everyone agrees with this interpretation. There are many people, both within and outside of Christianity, who completely reject the idea of end times prophecy, or see it as something metaphorical rather than literal.
So it's not like this is a universally accepted truth. Yeah. It's one interpretation among many.
Exactly. And it's up to each individual to decide how they want to engage with these ideas.
Right.
But what's interesting is how this belief system shapes the way people perceive events and leaders.
Like a lens through which they view the world.
Precisely. And in this case, that lens leads some people to see Donald Trump as a central figure in a cosmic drama, a leader chosen to play a specific role in the unfolding of biblical prophecy.
Okay, so we've talked about the books, we've talked about Jerusalem, and we've talked about end times prophecy. But what about Tesla? Where does he fit into all of this?
Ah, yes, the Tesla connection. This is where the Rabbi and Anderson start to speculate a bit more. They raise the question, what if Trump, through his uncle's access to Tesla's research inherited knowledge or technologies that could be relevant to these end times prophecies?
Wait, are they suggesting that Trump might have some sort of secret weapon based on Tesla's research? Like a real-life death ray?
Not necessarily. They're not making specific claims about weapons. Their argument is more nuanced than that.
Okay.
They point to Tesla's fascination with energy, with harnessing the power of the universe.
Right.
They suggest that perhaps some of his research could have implications for events that are described in biblical prophecy.
So it's not about a literal weapon, but maybe about some kind of advanced technology that could play a role in how these prophecies unfold.
That's more in line with their thinking. They're not saying Trump has a Tesla death ray.
Right.
They're asking, what if some of Tesla's ideas about energy and power ideas that were considered fringe science in his time are actually connected to events that are prophesied in the Bible?
Okay, I see. It's more about a potential link between Tesla's scientific vision and a spiritual or prophetic interpretation of history. It's like they're trying to merge science and religion in a way.
That's a good way to put it. And it's this blurring of boundaries, this blending of seemingly disparate concepts that makes this whole discussion so intriguing.
Right.
It challenges us to think outside of our usual categories and consider possibilities that we might have dismissed before.
It's definitely making me rethink my own assumptions. I mean, I've always been fascinated by Tesla, but I never thought about his work in the context of biblical prophecy. It's a whole new perspective.
And that's what's so valuable about this deep dive. It's not about convincing you to believe in any one particular interpretation.
Right.
It's about exposing you to different ways of thinking, different ways of making sense of the world around us.
So where does all of this leave us? We've got these books that some people interpret as prophetic, a solar eclipse that seems to align with those prophecies, a controversial decision about Jerusalem that feeds into those beliefs, and now a potential connection to Tesla's work. That's a lot to take in.
It is. And in our final segment, I think it's important to step back and look at the bigger picture.
Okay.
What does this deep dive tell us about the way we interpret history, the role of belief systems in shaping our perceptions, and the human desire to find meaning and purpose in a world that can often feel chaotic and unpredictable?
Let's do it. I'm ready for part 3. All right, so let's recap. We've got this collection of sources, and they kind of weave together this narrative all around Donald Trump.
Right.
A narrative with prophetic children's books.
Yeah.
A symbolically charged eclipse the relocation of the U.S. Embassy to Jerusalem, and even a connection to Nikola Tesla's missing research.
It's a lot.
It's a lot, right? Yeah. It's like we've stumbled onto the set of like a sci-fi thriller with a theological twist.
I think what's fascinating to me is how this deep dive highlights the human desire to find patterns and meaning even in the most seemingly random events.
Yeah, I totally get that. We love connecting the dots. It's like our brains are wired to look for patterns and narratives that help us make sense of the world.
Right.
Especially when things feel chaotic or uncertain.
Absolutely. And in times of uncertainty, people often turn to belief systems that offer explanations and comfort. The idea that there's a preordained plan,
Right.
even if it involves end-time scenarios, can be strangely comforting.
Okay.
It suggests that there's a bigger picture, a purpose to it all.
But that brings up some tricky questions, right?
Yeah.
Like, what about free will? If everything is already predetermined, what choices do we really have?
That's the age-old debate between predestination and free will.
Yeah.
And it's a question that our sources actually wrestle with. They acknowledge the tension between these two concepts.
So how do they reconcile this idea of prophecy with the concept of free will?
Well, they suggest that even if there is a divine plan, we still have a role to play in shaping how that plan unfolds.
Okay.
They emphasize the importance of personal responsibility, moral choices, and aligning ourselves with a higher purpose, even within the framework of a predetermined narrative.
So it's not a case of passive acceptance, but rather active participation.
Yes,
Like we have a part to play in this cosmic drama.
exactly. They argue that our choices matter even if the overall direction is set. It's like we're actors in a play. We might not have written the script, but we can choose how we deliver our lines.
I like that analogy. It makes the concept of prophecy less about fatalism and more about fulfilling our potential within a larger framework.
Right. And this ties back to the idea of national repentance and spiritual awakening that we touched on earlier.
Yeah.
Many of these sources view Trump's presidency and the events surrounding it as a wake-up call for America.
Okay.
They see it as a time for the nation to rediscover its moral compass, regardless of political affiliation.
But we have to acknowledge that not everyone shares this view.
Of course.
Trump's presidency was incredibly divisive, and his actions continued to be debated and scrutinized.
Absolutely. And it's crucial to remember that these sources represent a particular perspective. It's a perspective rooted in a specific interpretation of biblical prophecy and a belief in Trump's divinely appointed role.
So it's not about blindly accepting this narrative as the absolute truth, but rather using it as a lens through which to examine history and current events.
Precisely. It's an invitation to think critically, to engage with different viewpoints, and to recognize that history is rarely black and white.
This deep dive has certainly given me a lot to think about. It's a reminder that the meaning we ascribe to events often reflects our own beliefs and biases.
It also highlights the enduring power of narratives, especially those that offer explanations for the unexplainable and hope in times of uncertainty.
Right.
These narratives provide a framework for understanding a world that can often feel chaotic and unpredictable.
So what does this all mean for us? We've explored these intriguing connections, but what are we supposed to take away from this deep dive?
I think it's a call to engage more deeply with our own beliefs, to question our assumptions, and to consider the possibility that there are forces at play beyond our immediate understanding. Whether or not we subscribe to the specific interpretations presented in these sources, the questions they raise are valuable.
It's like we've been given a new set of lenses through which to view history, current events, and maybe even our own lives.
Exactly. And through those lenses, we might see patterns and connections that we never noticed before.
This deep dive has been a wild ride full of twists and turns, and I think it's safe to say we've only scratched the surface of these complex and fascinating connections.
Yeah.
Who knows what other rabbit holes we might stumble upon in the future.
And that's the beauty of it, isn't it? The exploration never truly ends.
So keep exploring, keep asking questions, and keep an open mind. You never know what you might discover.
Until next time, keep diving deep.